Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude, but as I sat at the head of the dinner table, watching my wife, Cassandra, laughing with her friend Harriet, I felt anything but thankful. The evening had been going well enough. Our house was filled with the warm aroma of roasted turkey and cinnamon-spiced apple pie, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of conversation among family and friends. The dining table was decorated with a golden autumn centerpiece, candles flickering in the dim light, setting the perfect ambience for a cozy family gathering. And then, Cassandra opened her mouth. "Nothing to be thankful for in bed," she blurted out, loud enough for the entire table to hear. Harriet nearly choked on her wine before bursting into laughter. The rest of the table went silent for a split second, long enough for me to feel the weight of their awkward glances. Then, Adam, her brother, cleared his throat uncomfortably while Cassandra smirked, clearly enjoying her own joke. I set my glass down carefully, meeting her gaze. I felt my jaw tighten, my fingers flexing around the stem of the glass. I had grown used to Cassandra's sharp tongue, the way she liked to make me the butt of her jokes. But this was different. It wasn't just a careless comment thrown in private, something I could brush off and pretend never happened. No, she wanted an audience. She wanted to entertain them at my expense. The worst part? I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd react. I exhaled slowly, forcing a smirk onto my face, the kind that didn't quite reach my eyes. It was a trick I had learned over the years, playing along to keep the peace, to avoid turning a small embarrassment into a full-blown argument in front of company. But inside I was seething. The laughter around the table was hesitant, polite, as if they were trying to gauge whether it was okay to laugh. Harriet, of course, leaned into it, nudging Cassandra playfully. "Oh, come on, Cass. Give him some credit. Maybe it's just a bad season." More laughter, more eyes darting in my direction. I felt my heartbeat thud against my ribs. My hands curled into fists beneath the table, hidden from view. I should let it go. That's what I always did, right? Smile, nod, brush it off like it didn't sting. Like it wasn't the 100th time she'd taken a jab at me in front of others. But something in me snapped. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't slam my fists on the table or demand an apology. No, that wasn't my style. Instead, I lifted my glass, took a slow sip of my drink, and locked eyes with Cassandra. She was still grinning, but there was something else in her expression now, something flickering behind the amusement. She had expected me to chuckle, to shrug, to play the role of the passive husband she had molded over the years. But I didn't. I let the silence stretch between us, my smirk unwavering, my gaze steady. And in that silence, I made a decision. I wasn't letting this one go. Not this time. For the rest of dinner, I barely spoke. I listened as Adam tried to change the subject, bringing up some nonsense about football. I nodded in the right places, even forced a chuckle at one of his weak jokes, but I wasn't really there. My mind was replaying Cassandra's words over and over again, the smug way she had said them, the way she had basked in the laughter that followed. I stole a glance at her every now and then, watching how she continued to enjoy the night, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She had no idea. She thought it was just another joke, another throwaway remark that would fade into the background like all the others. But she was wrong. When dessert was served, I barely touched my plate. Harriet kept cracking jokes, Cassandra kept sipping her wine, and the rest of the guests pretended not to notice the shift in my demeanor. Maybe they thought I was just tired. Maybe they assumed I'd shake it off like I always did. But I wasn't tired. I was done. When the last plate had been cleared and the guests started filing out, I stood by the door, thanking everyone for coming. Cassandra, of course, was still in high spirits, hugging Harriet and laughing like the night had been perfect. Adam clapped me on the shoulder as he left, his expression unreadable. I could tell he had caught on to something. Maybe not the full extent of my anger, but enough to know that I wasn't fine. "See you later, man," he said quietly. I nodded, offering him a tight-lipped smile. The last of the guests left, and finally, it was just me and Cassandra. She stretched her arms lazily, exhaling with satisfaction. "That went well," she mused, heading toward the kitchen. Harriet was hilarious tonight. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned, walked to the dining room, and began gathering the empty plates. My movements were slow, methodical, my mind racing with thoughts. Cassandra had no idea. She had no idea that tonight had been a turning point, that something inside me had shifted, that I was done playing along. As I stacked the plates, I made a silent promise to myself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house was quieter now. The kind of quiet that comes after guests leave, when the warmth of company is replaced by the hum of the dishwasher and the faint crackle of a dying candle's wick. I stood in the kitchen, stacking plates with a calmness that didn't match the storm brewing inside me. My movements were controlled, methodical, as if handling fragile glass instead of the emotions roiling beneath my skin. Across the room, Cassandra hummed softly while wiping down the countertops. She looked content, pleased with herself, like she had just wrapped up a successful performance. I clenched my jaw. She really didn't think twice about it, did she? I replayed her words in my head. Nothing to be thankful for in bed. The way she had thrown it out so casually, like it was nothing, like I was nothing. The way Harriet had burst into laughter, egging her on, while the rest of the table pretended not to notice how I went still, how I gripped my drink just a little too tight. And now, here she was, humming, cleaning up, as if she hadn't humiliated me in front of a room full of people. I took a slow breath, trying to decide how I wanted to handle this. I wasn't a man who yelled. I didn't believe in dramatic fights or unnecessary arguments. But something about tonight was different. Something about the way she had laughed at my expense, with zero regard for how it made me feel, had flipped a switch inside me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't willing to just let it go. I set a plate down with a little more force than necessary. It clinked loudly against the counter, finally catching Cassandra's attention. She glanced up, blinking in mild surprise. "You okay?" I turned to her slowly, resting my hands on the edge of the sink. "Do you even realize what you said tonight?" She frowned, clearly confused. "What?" "At dinner." I clarified, my voice controlled but firm. "That comment. About having nothing to be thankful for in bed." Cassandra rolled her eyes and let out a dismissive laugh, turning back to the countertop. "Oh, that? Come on, Mark. It was just a joke." There it was. That same tone. That same flippant attitude she always used when I pointed out something that bothered me. As if my feelings were nothing more than an inconvenience she didn't have time to entertain. I let out a breath through my nose, keeping my voice even. "A joke at my expense. In front of everyone." She sighed, as if she was already tired of the conversation. "You're being sensitive. It wasn't that serious." I studied her. The way she dismissed it so easily. The way she had no hesitation, no second thoughts about how it might have affected me. "You do this a lot," I said quietly. She arched an eyebrow. "Do what?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Make me the punchline." Cassandra groaned. "Oh my God, Mark. Are we really doing this?" It was a joke. People laughed. It's not a big deal. I stared at her. "It is to me." That made her pause. Not because she suddenly understood, but because she hadn't expected me to push back. Normally, I'd drop it by now. Normally, I'd shake my head, tell myself it wasn't worth the argument, and let her get away with it. Not tonight. She let out an exasperated sigh. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it. Harriet and I were just messing around. You know how we are." I tilted my head slightly. "Yeah, I do." I saw the flicker of annoyance cross her face. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know how you are." My voice was level, but there was an edge underneath. "I know how you like to get laughs at my expense. How you take little digs in front of an audience because you think it's funny, because you think it doesn't matter." I exhaled slowly. "But it does matter, Cassandra. It matters to me." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, instead of acknowledging anything, she scoffed. "God, you are really blowing this out of proportion." I nodded slowly. "Right." Because of course that was her reaction. It always was. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. How she was already preparing to make me the problem. How she'd twist this into me being too sensitive, me not being able to take a joke, me making a big deal out of nothing. But she wasn't going to win this one. I pushed off the counter, turning to load the dishwasher. I wouldn't argue with her. I wouldn't explain myself again. And that's what made her nervous. She hated when I stopped reacting. When I shut down instead of engaging in her little back and forths. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, watching me with narrowed eyes. "Oh, come on. Don't do that thing where you act all broody and silent. Just say what you need to say." I didn't look at her. I already did. Silence stretched between us. She was waiting for me to crack, to roll my eyes and move on. But I didn't. Instead, I wiped my hands and turned to leave the kitchen. "Mark," she called after me. I didn't stop. Because I wasn't interested in another argument where she played the same tired game. I wasn't interested in another night of pretending everything was fine. As I walked upstairs, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. I wasn't just angry, I was done. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Cassandra dictate how I felt anymore. I wasn't going to keep letting her belittle me under the guise of humor. And if she couldn't respect me, then maybe it was time I started respecting myself. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The house was still dark when I woke up. The clock on my nightstand glowed 5:12 a.m., the kind of time where everything outside felt untouched, waiting. Cassandra was still asleep beside me, her breath slow and even. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the night before. The sharp edge of her words still lingered in my chest, but something was different this time. I wasn't just angry. I was motivated. I slipped out of bed carefully, not bothering to turn on the light. I moved through the familiar darkness of our bedroom, pulling on a pair of sweatpants and an old hoodie. Normally, I'd start my morning the same way, groggily scrolling through my phone, sipping coffee, and letting the day roll over me like I was a passenger in my own life. But not today. Today, I had a plan. I grabbed my car keys from the counter and stepped outside, the early morning chill biting at my skin. The sky was still ink black, the streets empty except for a few porch lights flickering in the distance. It had been years since I had done this. Left the house before sunrise with an actual purpose. I drove in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the memory of Cassandra's voice still gnawing at me. Nothing to be thankful for in bed. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she had laughed, the way she had made me the punchline for everyone to see. And I had let her. Not anymore. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a gym I hadn't stepped foot in for years. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the cold air, glowing 24-hour fitness. I used to come here all the time, back when I felt like me, back when I had control over my own life. Somewhere along the way, I had let that slip. Let myself fall into a pattern of just existing instead of living. I wasn't going to be that guy anymore. The gym was nearly empty, save for a few dedicated early risers. The scent of rubber mats and faint disinfectant filled the air. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something shift in me, an old memory waking up. I used to love this. The challenge, the discipline, the feeling of pushing myself past the limits I thought I had. I approached the front desk, where a guy in his early 20s barely looked up from his phone. "You a member?" "I used to be," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He sighed, scrolling through something on his screen. "You want to renew?" I nodded. "Yeah." Minutes later, I was holding a fresh membership card, and for the first time in years, I actually felt in control of something. I started slow. The treadmill first, easing myself into the rhythm of my own footsteps. The belt hummed beneath me as I pushed forward, my lungs burning with the reminder that I hadn't done this in a long time. But with each step, I felt something old and familiar returning, the version of myself I had lost along the way. After the treadmill, I moved to the weights. My muscles trembled as I gripped the dumbbells, the weight heavier than I remembered, but I pushed through it. Every rep felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself Cassandra had chipped away over the years. I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about me. Halfway through my workout, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mark." I turned, sweat dripping down my temple, and saw Troy standing near the benches. Troy and I used to work together years ago, before he switched jobs. He had always been one of those guys who stayed disciplined, fit, motivated. And looking at him now, I could tell he hadn't let himself slip like I had. "Man, it's been a while," he said, clapping me on the back. I nodded, catching my breath. "Yeah, trying to get back into it." Troy smirked. "Good. You look like you needed this." I laughed, shaking my head. "You have no idea." We fell into conversation easily. He asked about work, I asked about his family, and somehow, the conversation veered toward the real reason I was here. "She still got you on a leash?" he asked, only half joking. I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. "Not for long." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "That bad?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared at the barbell in front of me, feeling the weight of everything Cassandra had said over the years. Everything she had done. Finally, I met his eyes. I let myself fade. And I'm done doing that. Troy studied me for a moment before nodding. Then stop talking about it and do something. I grinned. That's the plan. By the time I finished my workout, my muscles ached in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was a good ache, the kind that reminded me I was alive, that I was capable of something more. I drove home just as the sun was rising, a golden glow stretching across the sky. The house was still quiet when I stepped inside. Cassandra wasn't up yet. Good. I took a long shower, letting the water wash away the sweat, the exhaustion, the old version of myself that I was leaving behind. When I stepped out, I didn't feel drained. I felt recharged. For the first time in a long time, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I recognized, someone I was proud of. By the time Cassandra finally woke up, I was already dressed, sipping coffee at the kitchen counter. She walked in, still groggy, stretching as she grabbed a mug. She glanced at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "You're up early." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Yeah." She eyed my gym bag, the slight sheen of sweat still on my skin. "Did you go somewhere?" I met her gaze, taking my time before answering. "Yeah," I said simply. "I did." She waited, expecting me to elaborate, to explain myself like I always did. But I didn't. I just took another sip of coffee and picked up my phone, scrolling through emails. Cassandra frowned, but didn't press it. Not yet. But I saw the wheels turning in her head. She was used to being the one in control, the one dictating the tone of our conversations, our lives. She wasn't going to like this new version of me. And honestly, I didn't care. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't living for Cassandra. I was living for me. I walked into work that morning feeling different. Lighter, in a way. Not physically. My muscles still burned from the workout, reminding me of how far I had to go, but mentally. It was like a switch had flipped inside me. For years, I had moved through my days on autopilot, just existing, waiting for the next sarcastic remark, the next eye roll, the next moment where Cassandra reminded me, sometimes with words, sometimes with just a look, that I wasn't enough. But not today. Today, I had a plan. I stepped into my office, setting my coffee down and shrugging off my jacket. I had barely settled in before my coworker, Jake, leaned against my desk with a knowing smirk. "You look different," he said, dragging out the word like he was still trying to figure out what had changed. I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Jake crossed his arms. "I don't know. More awake." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Thanks, I think." He shrugged. "Didn't see you at lunch yesterday. Figured you were buried under Cassandra's latest to-do list." I exhaled through my nose, forcing a smile. Jake had always made comments like that. Light jabs at the way Cassandra ran things, how she made all the decisions. I used to laugh along, even if it stung. "Not today." "Nah," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Had other things to do." Jake's eyebrows lifted slightly. He studied me, as if noticing something for the first time. "Well, damn. You almost sound like a man with a life outside of his wife." I smirked, picking up my coffee. Maybe I am. I could feel his curiosity, but he didn't push. Instead, he nodded approvingly and walked off, leaving me with a strange sense of satisfaction. It was a small moment, barely a conversation, but it meant something. Because for the first time, I hadn't played into the usual script. I was done being predictable. The change didn't stop at work. When I got home that evening, Cassandra was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up as I walked in, only offering a distracted, "Hey," before returning her attention to whatever held her interest more than me. I placed my keys on the counter, not responding right away. Normally, I would have asked about her day, let her set the tone of the evening. Instead, I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a bottle of water, and started changing into my workout clothes. Cassandra finally glanced up, her brow furrowing. "Going somewhere?" I tightened my laces. "Yeah." She waited for me to elaborate, but I didn't. I just grabbed my gym bag and headed for the door. "Wait," she sat up straighter. "The gym? Again?" I nodded, swinging the bag over my shoulder. Her lips pressed together, eyes narrowing slightly. "Since when are you this into working out?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Since now." She blinked. "Okay." She didn't like it. I could see it in the way she shifted, her fingers tightening around her phone. She was used to knowing every detail of my routine, knowing exactly where I'd be, when I'd be home, what I was doing at all times. But this was something new, something she wasn't controlling. I didn't wait for her response. I just walked out the door. At the gym, I pushed myself harder. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned, but I welcomed it. Every rep, every sprint, every drop of sweat felt like proof that I was changing, that I was becoming someone stronger, not just physically, but mentally. Troy spotted me as I finished my last set. He smirked, nodding in approval. "You're serious about this?" I exhaled, wiping sweat from my brow. "Damn right I am." He handed me a water bottle, watching me for a moment. "So, what's the plan?" I frowned, uncapping the bottle. "Plan?" He gestured vaguely. "This. You." The sudden shift. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love seeing it. But where's it going? I took a long sip of water, considering his question. Where was this going? I had started this because I was sick of being treated like a joke. Sick of being the guy Cassandra could mock in front of friends and then dismiss when I had the nerve to call her out. But this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about me. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I know I'm not going back." Troy grinned. "Good answer." When I got home later that night, Cassandra was waiting. She was sitting at the kitchen table, wine glass in hand, her expression unreadable. I dropped my bag near the door, kicking off my shoes. "What's up?" She swirled the wine in her glass. "You tell me." I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the counter. "What's that supposed to mean?" She exhaled, setting the glass down. "You've been different." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and twisted off the cap. I took my time, letting the silence stretch. "Finally," I said, "is that a problem?" She scoffed. "I didn't say it was a problem, but it bothers you." She pressed her lips together. "It's just sudden." I nodded slowly, taking another sip of water. "Maybe it's not sudden. Maybe you just never noticed before." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I met her gaze. "It means I've been changing for a long time, Cassandra. You just didn't care enough to see it." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." I let out a humorless chuckle. "Isn't it?" For years, I had been fading in the background of my own marriage, playing the role of the husband who laughed when he was supposed to, who let things slide when he shouldn't have. And for years, Cassandra had assumed that version of me was permanent. But she was wrong. I wasn't that man anymore. And she was finally starting to realize it. She exhaled sharply, standing up from the table. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but whatever. Do what you want." She walked past me, heading for the stairs. I didn't stop her. Because for the first time in a long time, I really was going to do what I wanted. And I wasn't asking for her permission. The shift in our house was almost tangible now. It was like a change in temperature, subtle at first, but noticeable enough that Cassandra was starting to squirm. She was used to me being predictable, to me falling into the same comfortable routines, to me orbiting her world without question. But the version of me she had always known? He was gone, and she was starting to feel it. I came home later than usual that night. Not ridiculously late, just late enough that I knew it would get under her skin. Late enough that I didn't text her updates about where I was, what I was doing, or when I'd be home. I had spent the evening out, not with another woman, not doing anything shady, just living. I met up with a few guys from the gym for drinks, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't about the drinks or the company. It was about me reclaiming my time, my choices, my independence. And Cassandra? She hated it. She was sitting in the living room when I walked in, scrolling through her phone, pretending she wasn't waiting up. But the way she didn't look at me? That was a dead giveaway. "Hey," I said, setting my keys down. She responded with a clipped, "Hey," barely glancing up. I smirked to myself. Oh, she's pissed. I walked to the kitchen, taking my time, pouring myself a glass of water. I wasn't about to rush into a conversation just because she was itching for one. Let her sit in it for a while. Let her wonder. Finally, after a long, tense pause, she broke. "So, where were you?" I took a sip, letting the cold water sit on my tongue before swallowing. "Out." She scoffed. "Yeah, I got that much." "Out where?" I shrugged. "Just grabbed a few drinks with some guys from the gym." Her lips pressed into a tight line. She hated that answer. Not because she actually cared where I was, but because I hadn't felt the need to run it by her first. "Since when do you hang out after work?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but there was an edge to it. I leaned against the counter, meeting her gaze. "Since now." That was all I gave her. No explanations, no justifications, no guilt-ridden apologies. And that was what rattled her the most. She set her phone down with a little too much force. "Mark, what's going on with you?" I exhaled through my nose, tilting my head slightly. "You're gonna have to be more specific." You know exactly what I mean, she said, folding her arms. You're acting different. You're going to the gym all the time, staying out late, barely talking to me. I raised an eyebrow. Isn't that what you wanted? She blinked. What? I let out a small, humorless laugh. You've spent years making me the punchline of every conversation, treating me like a joke in front of your friends. Now you're mad that I finally stopped playing along. Her face twisted into something unreadable. That's not fair, isn't it? I challenged. She hesitated. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Tell me something, Cassandra. If I had made a comment like that about you at Thanksgiving, if I had humiliated you in front of a room full of people, how would you have reacted? Silence. She knew exactly how she would have reacted. She would have been furious. She would have demanded an apology, stewed in resentment for days, maybe even weeks. But when it was me, it was just a joke. I shook my head, stepping back. You don't like this new version of me because I don't need your approval anymore. Her jaw clenched. That's not true. I gave her a slow, knowing look. She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering away for a moment before she straightened her shoulders. Look, if you have a problem with me, say it. Don't just shut me out like this. I studied her for a moment, my grip tightening around the glass in my hand. I do have a problem with you, Cassandra, I said finally, my voice calm but firm. I have a problem with how you treat me. I have a problem with the way you talk about me when other people are around. I have a problem with the fact that you only care now because you feel like you're losing control. Her eyes darkened. That's not true, isn't it? She exhaled sharply, pushing off the couch. God, Mark, you're acting like I'm some kind of monster. I was joking. Harriet was laughing. Nobody else even cared. I felt my stomach tighten at that. There it was. That casual cruelty. The way she made it sound like my feelings were the problem, like the only thing that mattered was whether or not other people thought it was funny. I set my glass down. Wow, I muttered, shaking my head. She frowned. What? I looked at her, my expression unreadable. Nothing. I let out a soft chuckle, running a hand over my jaw. It's just so clear to me now. She crossed her arms. What is? I met her eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw her for exactly who she was. I was never your husband, I said quietly. I was just your favorite punchline. The words landed like a slap. Her face paled slightly, her lips parting as if she wanted to respond. But what could she say? I had spent years brushing off her jabs, swallowing my pride, telling myself it wasn't worth fighting over. But the truth? I had been miserable. And the moment I stopped catering to her, the moment I stopped playing along, she started to panic. Because deep down, she knew. She knew she had pushed me too far. She just never thought I'd actually do something about it. I turned away from her, grabbing my gym bag again. Where are you going? She asked, her voice tighter now, a thread of uncertainty weaving through it. I didn't even look at her. Out. Again. I grabbed my keys, my voice casual. Yeah. She took a step forward. Mark, you can't just eat. I turned to face her, my expression calm but final. Watch me. And with that, I walked out the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't yell. I just left. And as I stepped into the night air, inhaling deeply, I realized something. For the first time in a long, long time. I felt free. The night air felt different. Crisp. Lighter. Or maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the weight I had been carrying for years finally starting to lift. I slid into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel, but I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My own eyes stared back at me, calm, steady, but different. I wasn't the same man I had been a few months ago. And I sure as hell wasn't the same man I had been at Thanksgiving. A notification buzzed on my phone. Cassandra. I didn't bother looking at it. I already knew what it would say. Where are you? Are you coming back? We need to talk. No, she needed to talk. She needed to figure out how to get me back under her thumb, how to smooth things over just enough that she could go back to pretending everything was fine. But I wasn't interested in playing that game anymore. I started the car and pulled out of the driveway, the headlights cutting through the darkness. I wasn't sure where I was going. I just knew I wasn't staying home. Not tonight. I ended up at Troy's place. I knocked on his door, and a few seconds later, he opened it, a beer in hand, looking surprised but not unwelcome. Didn't think I'd see you again tonight, he said, stepping aside to let me in. I shrugged. Didn't feel like going home. That answer was enough. He didn't push, didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he grabbed another beer from the fridge, handed it to me, and gestured for me to sit. The place was simple, no fancy decorations, no unnecessary clutter. Just a couch, a TV, and a few framed pictures on the wall. A place that felt lived in but not weighed down by someone else's expectations. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, sipping our drinks, watching whatever game was on. I could feel the question lingering in the air, though, waiting to be asked. Finally, Troy leaned back, glancing over at me. "You done?" I took a sip of my beer. "With what?" He gave me a knowing look. "With her." I let out a slow breath, rolling the bottle between my hands. "I think I've been done for a while," I admitted. I just didn't want to admit it to myself. Troy nodded, like he had already known that before I did. "So what now?" I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my jaw. "I don't know." And that was the truth. For years, my life had revolved around Cassandra's moods, her opinions, her expectations. I had been so busy trying to keep the peace, to avoid fights, to make things work, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I actually wanted. But now, I had a blank slate. And for the first time in years, that didn't scare me. When I finally got home later that night, the house was dark, except for the glow of the kitchen light. Cassandra was sitting at the table, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes scanning me like she was trying to read me, trying to figure out what was going on inside my head. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. I set my keys down. "Out." A muscle in her jaw twitched. "You keep saying that." "Because it's the truth." She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "Are we ever going to have a real conversation, or are you just going to keep walking out on me?" I studied her. "Do you really want to have a real conversation, Cassandra? Or do you just want to smooth things over so you can go back to pretending everything is fine?" Her eyes flickered with something. Anger, maybe. Frustration. But also something else. Something close to panic. "You're acting like I'm the bad guy," she said. I let out a humorless laugh. "I'm acting like I finally see things for what they are." She sat up straighter, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. "And what do you see?" I met her gaze, my voice steady. "I see a woman who spent years belittling her husband in front of other people, who laughed at his expense, who dismissed his feelings whenever he tried to bring them up. I see someone who never thought twice about how her words affected me. But now that she can feel me pulling away, she suddenly wants to talk." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I stepped closer, resting my hands on the back of a chair. "Tell me something, Cassandra. If I had never started changing, if I had just kept letting things slide like I always did, would you even be sitting here right now? Or would you still be joking with Harriet about what a joke your husband is?" Silence. A long, heavy silence. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her grip tightening around the stem of her glass. "Mark, I didn't mean." "Yeah," I cut in. "That's the thing. You never mean it." Her shoulders slumped slightly, her face pale under the soft glow of the kitchen light. For the first time, she looked nervous. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. "I don't hate you, Cassandra, but I'm done living like this." She blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the weight of my words. "You're done?" she echoed, like she needed me to say it again. I nodded. "Yeah." She sat there for a long moment, staring at me, searching for something in my expression that wasn't there anymore. Finally, she let out a slow breath and picked up her glass, taking a sip before setting it down gently. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice quiet. I nodded. "That's it." She inhaled sharply, her fingers curling into fists for a brief second before she forced herself to relax. "Fine." She stood up abruptly, grabbing her wine glass and walking past me without another word. I didn't stop her. I just stood there, listening to the sound of her footsteps disappearing upstairs. And then, finally, after years of silently drowning in this marriage, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just free. For the first time in a long, long time. I woke up the next morning feeling different. Not rested, not yet, but lighter. Like something had cracked open inside me, and all the resentment I'd been holding on to had started spilling out. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Cassandra wasn't in bed when I rolled over. Not that I expected her to be. Last night's conversation had changed something between us, shifted the ground we'd been standing on for years. I wasn't sure how she'd react today. Maybe she'd pretend nothing happened, like she always did. Maybe she'd lash out. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd finally realize that I was serious this time. I stretched, rubbing my hands over my face, then got out of bed. The house smelled like fresh coffee, but the usual warmth that came with it was missing. It didn't feel like home anymore. Just walls and furniture and silence. When I walked downstairs, Cassandra was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, a mug of coffee beside her. She didn't look up when I entered. I grabbed my own mug from the cabinet, pouring myself a cup. The air between us felt thick, but I wasn't going to be the one to break it first. A few minutes passed before she finally spoke. So what? You're just done. I exhaled slowly, setting my coffee down. Yeah. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Just like that. I met her eyes. Cassandra, I've been done for a long time. You just never noticed. Her fingers tightened around her phone. That's bullshit, she snapped. You never said anything before. You never acted like this before. I shook my head. No, I did. You just didn't listen. Her jaw clenched. You're really acting like I'm the villain here. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Do you even hear yourself? The moment I stop tolerating the way you treat me, suddenly I'm acting different? Like I'm the problem. I let out a breath, shaking my head. That's exactly why I'm done. She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and something else, uncertainty. Cassandra wasn't used to this version of me. The version that didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't try to fix things. She was used to power, to control, to having the last word. But she didn't have control anymore. And she knew it. I grabbed my coffee and took a sip, letting the silence sit between us. She shifted in her chair, her knee bouncing slightly, like she was holding something back. Then, finally, she exhaled sharply and set her phone down. So what now? I looked at her, taking my time with my answer. I don't know. Her lips parted, like she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. She wasn't used to hearing that from me. I had always been the one to make plans, to try to make things work, to fix whatever was broken. But I wasn't fixing this. Not anymore. She swallowed hard. Are you leaving? I exhaled, looking down at my coffee. I hadn't made that decision yet. Not fully. But I knew one thing for sure. If things stayed the same, if she kept treating me the way she had for years, then I wouldn't be here much longer. I don't know, I repeated. She scoffed, standing up abruptly. God, Mark, can you stop being so? She cut herself off, pressing her fingers to her temple. You can't just throw this at me and expect me to be okay with it. I raised an eyebrow. You think I'm okay with it? She glared at me, but there was something else in her expression, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear, not anger, not frustration. She was scared, because she had spent so many years assuming I'd always be there, that I'd always come back no matter what she said or did. But now, she wasn't so sure. I set my mug down, pushing off the counter. I need to get ready for work. I walked past her without another word, leaving her standing there, gripping the edge of the table like she was holding on for balance. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. At work, I felt more focused than I had in a long time. I buried myself in projects, emails, anything that kept my mind busy. But even then, I could feel it lingering. The weight of that morning, of everything left unsaid. Jake swung by my office around lunchtime, leaning against the doorframe. You good? I nodded. Yeah. He studied me for a second, then smirked. Cassandra's still freaking out? I let out a breath, rubbing the back of my neck. She's not handling it well. Jake chuckled. I bet. She's losing control of her favorite punching bag. I didn't laugh. Not because he was wrong, but because it hit too close to home. He must have noticed, because his expression softened. Seriously though, man. I'm glad you're standing up for yourself. It's about time. I nodded, picking up my coffee. Yeah, it is. Jake hesitated, then asked, So what's the plan? I stared at my desk for a moment before answering. I don't know yet. And that was the truth. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of not knowing. That night, when I got home, I could tell Cassandra had been waiting. She was in the kitchen again, a homemade meal on the table, one of my favorites, something she hadn't cooked in months. The lights were dim, candles flickering, a glass of wine already poured for me. A grand gesture. It was the kind of thing she did when she felt threatened, when she realized she was losing control. I set my bag down, studying the table. What's this? She gave me a small, forced smile. Just thought we could have a nice dinner. Talk. I didn't move. Because I already knew what this was. This wasn't about fixing things. It wasn't about understanding me. It was about her. About regaining power. Sit, she urged, gesturing to the chair across from her. I stood there for a long moment. Then, slowly, I walked forward and sat down. She exhaled, as if relieved, like she had won something just by getting me to agree. I picked up my fork, twirling it in my fingers. Then I looked at her. You can't fix this with one nice dinner. She flinched. I know that. Do you? I asked, tilting my head. She swallowed. Mark, I set my fork down. I'm not angry, Cassandra. Not anymore. Her face twisted slightly. Then what are you? I met her gaze, and for the first time in our marriage, I told her the truth. I'm done. The words landed like a blow. She sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. She had felt it coming. But now, she had to face it. I didn't get up right away. I let the silence settle, let the truth of it sink in. Then, finally, I stood. And I walked away. And Cassandra? For the first time since I had known her, she didn't stop me. I woke up before the sun. Not because I had to, not because of some alarm blaring in my ear, but because my body refused to stay asleep. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the heavy silence of the house. The space beside me was still warm. Cassandra must have gone downstairs recently. Or maybe she had just been awake all night, tossing and turning, trying to figure out a way to pull me back in. But there was nothing left to pull. I threw the blankets off and sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand over my face. My muscles still ached from yesterday's workout, but it was a good ache, a reminder that I was still changing, still reclaiming something I had lost a long time ago. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel regret. I just felt done. And that was a strange kind of peace. I stood up, threw on a pair of joggers and a hoodie, then headed downstairs. The air smelled like coffee, but the house still felt cold. Not physically, no. Cassandra would never let the thermostat drop too low, but emotionally. It was like neither of us wanted to be the first to say anything. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what was happening between us. She was at the kitchen counter, stirring her coffee. She looked up when she saw me, but she didn't say good morning. I didn't either. Instead, I grabbed a mug and poured myself a cup. I felt her watching me, waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to crack. But I wouldn't give her that. Not today. Not anymore. She took a slow sip of her coffee before finally breaking the silence. Are you really going to act like nothing is happening? I set my mug down and turned to face her. I could ask you the same thing. She huffed, shaking her head. Jesus, Mark, do you want to end our marriage? I met her gaze. Do you? She flinched, just slightly. Because that wasn't the answer she was expecting. She thought I'd apologize. She thought I'd reassure her. But the truth was, I didn't know if I wanted to end our marriage. I just knew I didn't want it like this anymore. She set her mug down harder than necessary. You're being impossible. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. No, Cassandra. For the first time, I'm being honest. She folded her arms, her eyes narrowing. So what? You want space? Time apart? You want to sleep in separate rooms now? I shrugged. I want to stop feeling like a punchline in my own marriage. She let out a humorless laugh, running a hand through her hair. Oh my God. Are we really still on about that stupid Thanksgiving comment? I tilted my head, studying her. No, Cassandra. It wasn't just Thanksgiving. That was just the moment I finally realized I'd had enough. She opened her mouth to argue, but she must have seen something in my expression, something final, because she shut it again. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then she sighed, looking away. You know, I never meant to hurt you. That was the closest thing to an apology she had ever given me. And even that sounded more like an excuse than an admission of guilt. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my coffee. I know. And I did. Cassandra didn't hurt me on purpose. It wasn't malicious. It was just how she was. And that was the problem. She had spent so long treating me like a joke that she never stopped to consider how it made me feel. She never stopped to ask if I was okay with it. Because, to her, my feelings didn't matter. And now, she was realizing that they did. She sighed again, rubbing her temples. So what happens now? I let out a slow breath, running a hand over my jaw. I don't know. And that was the honest truth. I didn't know if we were beyond saving. I didn't know if she could change, or if I even wanted her to. I just knew that I couldn't live like this anymore. She studied me for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she nodded. Fine. I raised an eyebrow. Fine. She met my gaze. If you want space, take it. I wasn't sure if she meant it, or if this was just another power move, another way to test me, to see if I'd break first. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. I gave a small nod. Okay. And then I grabbed my gym bag and walked out the door. At the gym, I pushed myself harder than usual. I needed to. My body was the only thing I had full control over right now. Every rep, every sprint, every drop of sweat was a reminder that I was reclaiming something that had been taken from me, myself. Troy spotted me between sets, raising an eyebrow. Damn, man. You're on a mission today. I exhaled, wiping the sweat from my forehead. Something like that. He studied me for a moment, then smirked. Let me guess. Cassandra didn't like your new attitude. I let out a breath, shaking my head. She doesn't know what to do with it. Troy chuckled. Yeah, man. Women like that? They love control. The moment they feel it slipping, they start scrambling. I didn't say anything. Because he wasn't wrong. Cassandra wasn't used to me making my own choices. She wasn't used to me putting myself first. And the truth was, she probably never expected me to. Troy slapped my shoulder. Look, man, whatever happens, just remember, you don't owe her your misery. I let those words settle in my chest. Because he was right. For years, I had put her feelings, her comfort, her happiness before my own. And where had that gotten me? Nowhere. That night, when I got home, Cassandra didn't say much. She was curled up on the couch, watching TV, but I could tell she wasn't really watching it. Her mind was somewhere else. She glanced at me when I walked in. Did you eat? It was a simple question, but it felt loaded. I nodded. Yeah. She pursed her lips, looking away. Okay. I wasn't sure what she wanted me to say. Maybe she wanted me to sit down, to tell her everything was fine, to pretend like we weren't falling apart. But I wasn't going to do that. Instead, I just nodded toward the stairs. I'm heading up. She didn't stop me. She didn't argue. She just sat there, staring at the screen, lost in thought. And as I climbed the stairs, I realized something. I wasn't the one who was lost anymore. She was. The house felt different now. Not because anything had physically changed. The furniture was still in place. The walls were still painted the same neutral colors Cassandra had chosen years ago, and the scent of her vanilla candles still lingered in the air. But the energy was different. It was like we were living in a space that neither of us recognized anymore. A house filled with unspoken words, heavy silences, and something neither of us wanted to name yet. I sat in my office, staring at my computer screen, but my mind was elsewhere. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, an unfinished email blinking at me, waiting to be completed. But I wasn't focused on work. I was focused on her. On how, ever since that night, since I told her I was done, Cassandra had changed. Not in some dramatic way. Not in the way movies make it seem, where a person suddenly realizes their mistakes and begs for forgiveness. No, this was different. She was trying to act normal. Trying to act like things weren't shifting beneath her feet, like she wasn't afraid of losing control. She still cooked dinner, still poured my coffee in the morning, still left little notes on the counter reminding me about bills or groceries. But everything she did now felt calculated, like she was waiting for me to soften, waiting for me to come back to her. But I wasn't the same man she had gotten used to, and that scared her more than anything. When I got home that evening, Cassandra was already in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. The smell of garlic and butter filled the air, and I knew, without even asking, that she was cooking my favorite meal. I leaned against the doorway, watching her. She didn't look up. Hey. I exhaled. Hey. She kept stirring, her movements slow and deliberate. You're home earlier than usual. I checked my watch. Barely. She nodded, like she was expecting me to say more. I didn't. A few moments of silence stretched between us before she finally turned, wiping her hands on a towel. Are we going to talk about this? I met her gaze. Talk about what? She let out a frustrated breath. Don't do that. Do what? Act like nothing's happening. I raised an eyebrow. You've been acting like nothing's happening for years. Why does it bother you now? That made her flinch. Just slightly. But I caught it. She swallowed, gripping the edge of the counter. Because I feel like I'm losing you. I studied her for a long moment, my jaw tightening. Cassandra, you lost me a long time ago. Her breath hitched. She hadn't expected me to say it so plainly. I stepped forward, resting my hands on the counter. You want to know the difference between now and before? Before, I just didn't say it out loud. She shook her head. That's not fair. I laughed under my breath. Fair. I echoed. You think any of this has been fair? You think it was fair when you mocked me in front of your friends? When you made me feel like a joke every time we were in public. When you brushed off every concern I ever had and made me feel like I was just being too sensitive. She inhaled sharply. That's not. I cut her off. Yes, it is. That's exactly what happened. And you know it. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to fight. But instead, she pressed her fingers to her temples, exhaling shakily. For the first time in years, Cassandra looked defeated. And I didn't feel guilty, because she wasn't defeated by me. She was defeated by the realization that she couldn't control the situation anymore, that she had pushed me too far, that she had lost me, and there was nothing she could do to fix it. She sucked in a breath, forcing herself to straighten. So what happens now? I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms. I don't know, Cassandra. You tell me. She let out a bitter laugh. Oh, come on. I know you. You don't just wake up one day and decide you're done. You have a plan. You always have a plan. I met her gaze, my voice steady. I didn't have a plan for this. I just finally stopped making excuses for you. Silence. For a long moment, she just stood there, gripping the counter, staring at me like she was trying to see me, really see me, for the first time in years. And then she sighed. A deep, tired sigh. I never meant to push you away, she said quietly. I exhaled, shaking my head. I don't think you ever meant to keep me either. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She had no response to that, because she knew it was true. Cassandra had never been the kind of woman who cherished what she had. She always had control, always had the upper hand. And as long as she thought I'd never leave, she never had to think about losing me. But now she had to. She swallowed hard. Do you still love me? The question hit me harder than I expected. Because once upon a time, I would have said yes without hesitation. Once upon a time, I would have fought for this marriage, no matter how much it hurt me. But now, I wasn't sure anymore. I ran a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. I don't know. Her breath hitched. You don't know? I shook my head. I don't. And that was the most honest answer I could give her. I still cared about her. Of course I did. We had built a life together. We had spent years in the same house, shared the same space, made memories, good and bad. But love? I wasn't sure if what we had now was love or just the ghost of what used to be. She looked away, blinking rapidly like she was trying to keep herself together. I don't want to lose you. I studied her. I don't think you ever thought you could. Her shoulders slumped slightly. She had no defense. For the first time, she wasn't fighting me. She wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. She wasn't trying to turn it around on me. She was just standing there, realizing that she had already lost and that there might not be a way to fix it. She swallowed hard. So what do we do? I let out a breath, shaking my head. I don't know, Cassandra, but whatever happens next, it's not just going to be up to you. She nodded slowly, biting her lip. And for the first time in a long time, she looked scared. Not scared of losing control. Not scared of not having the upper hand. Scared of what happens when you push someone too far and realize there's no coming back. The days that followed were quiet. Not the kind of peaceful quiet where everything felt settled, but the kind of silence that came before a storm. Cassandra had stopped pushing. Stopped trying to make small talk. Stopped trying to bait me into arguments. Stopped acting like everything was fine. Instead, she moved through the house like a shadow, aware that something was slipping away from her, but unsure how to stop it. And me? I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even resentful. I was just done. The realization had settled deep inside me, solid and unshakable. The love I had once felt for Cassandra had been worn down by years of being dismissed, humiliated, and overlooked. I had spent so much time trying to make our marriage work that I hadn't even realized how one-sided that effort had been. But now, I was seeing things clearly for the first time. And I knew exactly what I had to do. It was Saturday morning when I finally said it. Cassandra was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into her coffee cup like it held all the answers she had been searching for. I stood across from her, my own coffee growing cold in my hands. I took a deep breath. I think we should separate. Her head snapped up so fast I thought she might get whiplash. Her eyes widened, her face going pale. What? I met her gaze, my voice steady. I said I think we should separate. For a moment, she just stared at me, blinking rapidly like she was trying to process the words. Like she hadn't really believed it would come to this. Then, she let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Are you serious? I nodded. Yeah, I am. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Mark, come on. We've had problems before. We've had fights. But this? You don't just throw away a marriage over a few arguments. I set my coffee down, folding my arms. That's the problem, Cassandra. You think this is about a few arguments. Her nostrils flared. Oh my God, is this still about Thanksgiving? I tilted my head, studying her. Do you really think this is just about that? She crossed her arms, pressing her lips into a thin line. I don't know, Mark. Because you haven't actually told me what you want. You just pulled away and started acting like a stranger, and now, all of a sudden, you want a separation. I sighed. I didn't pull away. I just stopped chasing after you. Her breath hitched slightly, but she covered it up quickly, standing up from her chair. So that's it. You're just done. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I am. Cassandra let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through her hair. Wow. Just wow. She turned away from me, gripping the edge of the counter like she needed to steady herself. And you've already made up your mind, haven't you? I didn't say anything, because she already knew the answer. She turned back to face me, her jaw clenched. You know, for years, I put up with things in this marriage that weren't perfect either. But I didn't just give up. I narrowed my eyes. Put up with what, Cassandra? What exactly have you endured in this marriage? She hesitated, because she didn't have an answer. Not one that would make her the victim. Not one that would erase the fact that I was the one who had been disrespected, dismissed, treated like a joke. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging slightly. So what now? I took a deep breath. I'll start looking for a place. I don't want to blindside you by just leaving, but I think we both know this isn't working anymore. She swallowed hard, nodding slowly. And if I don't want a separation? I met her gaze, my voice soft but firm. Then you'll have to accept it anyway. Her face crumbled slightly, but she quickly turned away, pretending to busy herself with something on the counter. And that was the moment I knew. Cassandra didn't want this marriage to end because she loved me. She wanted it to stay intact because it was comfortable, because she didn't like the idea of losing control, of being the woman whose husband walked away first. But that wasn't enough. Not for me. Not anymore. By the time the next week rolled around, I had already started looking at apartments. I hadn't told anyone yet. No friends, no family. This wasn't something I wanted to announce until it was real. But Cassandra? She had started acting different. Not in the way I expected. Not desperate. Not manipulative. She was quiet. She didn't snap at me anymore. She didn't make passive-aggressive comments. She didn't make jokes at my expense. Instead, she watched me. She watched me as I came home from the gym, sweat still clinging to my skin. She watched me as I took work calls in the living room, my voice confident, steady, in a way it hadn't been for years. She watched me as I stopped orbiting her world, and instead, built one of my own. And I could see the regret in her eyes. The realization that she had let me slip away, and now, it was too late to bring me back. But I didn't feel bad for her, because she had choices too. She could have chosen to respect me. She could have chosen to listen to me when I told her, over and over again, that her words hurt. She could have chosen to see me as her husband instead of a punchline. But she didn't. And now, she had to live with the consequences of that. 2 weeks later, I signed a lease for a new apartment. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. But it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own life again. The night before I left, Cassandra stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms folded tightly across her chest. So that's it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I met her gaze. Yeah. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled. I never thought it would end like this. I nodded. Me neither. She hesitated, then swallowed hard. Is there anything I could have done? I sighed. You could have listened. A long time ago. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't argue, because she knew the truth. And then, just like that, it was over. I picked up my bag, walked past her, and didn't look back. Because the version of me who would have stayed, he didn't exist anymore. I remember that day as if it were carved into my memory in the harshest way possible. I was driving with Celeste, my wife, on what was meant to be a simple road trip after visiting her sister. The road was long and empty, and the late morning sun cast long shadows over the asphalt. Yet, something felt off from the start. Celeste had been smirking all morning, a smile that was too coy and secretive. It was as if she were hiding a truth from me, a truth that would shatter everything I believed about our life together. I tried to brush away that uneasy feeling, telling myself that maybe she was just playful. But deep down, I sensed trouble brewing. We pulled into a rundown gas station far off the highway, a place that seemed forgotten by time. The station was nearly abandoned. The pumps stood rusted and silent, and the small building's flickering neon sign did little to brighten the faded concrete. As soon as we parked, Celeste turned to me with that same unsettling smile and said in a voice so sweet it bordered on insincere, "Go grab me a coffee, babe." Her tone was light, almost teasing, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I shrugged off the growing anxiety and stepped inside to fetch the coffee, unaware that I was about to cross the threshold into a nightmare. Inside the gas station, the air felt heavy and stale. Every step I took echoed in the emptiness, a constant reminder that I was alone. I filled a paper cup with coffee, the hot liquid barely cutting through the cold dread that was forming in my gut. I glanced at the worn-out clock on the wall and wondered how long I would be away from Celeste. When I finally pushed open the door to return, my heart pounded as I scanned the area for her familiar figure. But there was nothing, no trace of Celeste, no sign of our car, and even my personal belongings had vanished into thin air. My wallet, my bag, my phone, they were all gone. Then, as I stood frozen in disbelief, my phone buzzed. I fumbled to retrieve it and saw a text message that sent a wave of panic crashing over me. "Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider this a fun challenge." Face blowing a kiss. The message was taunting, laced with a cruelty that I had never expected from the woman I once loved. I tried to call her, desperate for an explanation, but every ring ended in an empty, echoing voicemail. In that gut-wrenching moment, a cold realization hit me. I wasn't going home, not to Celeste, not ever. I stood there in the barren lot, my fingers still trembling as I clutched the now-cold coffee cup. Every memory of our shared past, the laughter, the whispered secrets, the dreams we once built together, turned bitter in my mouth. I felt betrayed and abandoned, as if my entire life had been a cruel illusion. The gas station, with its peeling paint and forlorn silence, became a grim symbol of the void Celeste had left behind. I realized that this was no ordinary road trip mishap. I had been set up, deceived by the person I had trusted most, and now I was forced to confront a future filled with uncertainty and heartbreak. The lonely wind stirred the dry leaves at my feet, echoing the chaos in my heart as I took my first step into a life I never chose. A life where every moment would remind me of that fateful abandonment and the betrayal that altered everything forever. I stood there on the cracked pavement of that desolate gas station, holding a cup of coffee that was losing its warmth as fast as my hope was melting away. The cold metal of the handle dug into my palm, and with every shiver that ran down my spine, I felt the weight of betrayal press down on me. I couldn't believe that I had been left in that forsaken place, abandoned not by chance, but by the deliberate cruelty of the woman I once loved. Celeste had always claimed that her harsh methods were her way of teaching me life lessons, but now, in this heart-wrenching moment, her lessons left me broken. I was alone with nothing but my fading memories and a bitter sense of loss. My thoughts swirled as I replayed every moment of the morning. Her sly smile as she told me to fetch a coffee, the way her eyes flickered with secret mischief, and that gut-wrenching realization that I was being toyed with. Every detail stung like a fresh cut. I recalled the $160 in my pocket from an earlier stop, a meager sum that, in any other circumstance, might have meant little. But now, it symbolized the only remnant of a life that had suddenly been stripped away. My backpack was still in the car, my wallet, my phone, everything I once held dear had vanished into thin air, leaving me with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. The desolation of the empty highway around me mirrored the emptiness I felt inside. I stepped away from the counter, my mind reeling, and sought answers in the silence that enveloped the station. Each step felt heavy as I tried to piece together the fragments of my shattered reality. As I walked back to the car, the cold wind whipped through my hair and carried with it echoes of the past, memories of laughter and shared dreams that now seemed like distant illusions. I wondered how life could turn so dark so quickly, how one moment I had been a man with a future, and the next, a stranded soul grappling with the remnants of a deceitful love. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't willing to let this betrayal define me. Yet the anger was overwhelming. I clenched my fists, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and defiance welling up from deep within. The pain was not just for the loss of my belongings, but for the shattering of trust that I had once believed was unbreakable. I stood at the crossroads of heartbreak and resolve, knowing that from this point forward, nothing would ever be the same. Every footstep echoed with the promise of retribution, and every gust of wind whispered a secret of the past I wished to forget. With each slow, measured breath, I made a silent vow. I would not allow Celeste's betrayal to control my destiny. I decided then and there that I would face the uncertain road ahead with strength and determination, even if it meant leaving behind the fragments of a life I once knew. I stepped away from the station and onto the deserted road, my heart pounding in time with my uncertain steps. In that moment of desolation, as I embraced both the pain and the promise of a future unbound by the chains of deceit, I felt the first stirrings of a new beginning, a beginning that, while steeped in sorrow, would forge a path toward a life defined not by betrayal, but by resilience and the hard-won lessons of a broken heart. Every mile I took became a silent testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can find a way to fight back and rebuild from the ruins of a shattered past. I still remember the moment when despair turned into a reluctant hope, as if the universe itself was giving me a chance to start over. I dialed the number of the one person who had always cared for me, even when Celeste had pushed everyone away, my sister-in-law, Helen. It was strange how fate worked. Celeste had cut her off long ago, saying Helen was a bad influence, but I knew better. Helen answered on the second ring, her voice warm and steady, filled with concern and a quiet determination. "What happened?" she asked, and I could sense the worry in her tone even before I explained the chaos at the gas station. I told her everything. How Celeste's smirk had hinted at hidden plans, how I had been sent to fetch coffee, and how I returned to find that she, our car, and all my belongings had vanished without a trace. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, and for a moment, I wondered if I was mistaken, if this was some cruel joke. But then Helen said, "I'll help you, don't worry." In that single phrase lay a lifeline, a promise of support I had not expected but desperately needed. Within minutes, she arranged for a bus ticket and even called a local taxi to pick me up. Her swift actions made me realize that even though Celeste had abandoned me, I was not entirely alone in this battle. The feeling was bittersweet. The warmth of Helen's care contrasted sharply with the cold emptiness left by Celeste's betrayal. Riding in the taxi, I gazed out the window as the world blurred past, a mix of open fields, abandoned roads, and distant city lights. The journey felt surreal, like a bridge between the life I had lost and the uncertain future ahead. I couldn't help but replay the moments of the morning over and over in my mind. Celeste's unnerving smile, the deceptive calm in her voice, and the sudden void when I returned to the gas station. Each memory was a painful reminder of the trust one had placed in her, a trust that had been shattered beyond repair. I felt as if I were traveling not just through miles of road, but through layers of a life I once knew, peeling away until nothing remained but raw, exposed truth. At the bus station, the atmosphere was modest and bustling with travelers, each wrapped up in their own stories of departure and arrival. I sat on a worn bench, the chill of the place seeping into my bones, while my thoughts raced. The bus's engine hummed in the background, a constant rhythm that made me reflect on how life moves forward, regardless of the obstacles that try to hold it back. It was in that moment of stillness that I began to understand the true meaning of a new beginning. This journey was not merely about escaping a painful past, but about reclaiming my own identity, piece by fragile piece. The betrayal that had once defined my existence was slowly giving way to a realization that I was stronger than the hurt, and that there was a future waiting to be built from the remnants of what I had lost. I started to imagine a life where I could rebuild not only my home, but also the parts of me that had been broken. I thought of a small workshop where I could restore old houses, of a modest life filled with honest work and simple pleasures. The idea of creating something meaningful from the debris of my past filled me with a cautious optimism. Each mile on the bus, each quiet moment of reflection, felt like a step toward a new self, a version of me that was not defined by betrayal but by resilience, and the will to forge a different path. Helen's kindness had sparked a light in the dark, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected help can lead to the most profound changes. I continued to reflect on the choices that had led me here. Every decision, every whispered promise, and every silent moment of doubt played together in my mind like a slow, mournful song. I recalled the early days of our marriage, when life seemed full of hope and every challenge was met with a united front. Those memories now felt distant and almost unreal, as if they belonged to a different person altogether. In this moment, separated by time and betrayal, I was forced to acknowledge the painful truth that sometimes the person you love can also be the one who destroys the life you once dreamed of. Yet even in that stark realization, there was a seed of strength, a small, stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. I promised myself that no matter how deep the wounds, I would strive to heal them, to grow stronger from the pain and rebuild a life that was honest and true to who I was. With every heartbeat, I felt the layers of my past begin to peel away, revealing the raw potential of a future that was waiting just beyond the horizon. The journey ahead was daunting, and I knew that the road to recovery would be long and filled with unexpected twists. Yet, as I sat in that bus station, surrounded by strangers who carried their own stories of loss and hope, I felt an overwhelming sense of possibility. Every face in the crowd represented a chance to start fresh, to leave behind the painful echoes of yesterday, and to build a tomorrow defined by courage and determination. The very idea of starting over, of carving a new path from the fragments of my shattered past, was both terrifying and exhilarating. In that charged atmosphere, I began to see that the end of one story was merely the beginning of another, one that I had the power to write on my own terms. With a quiet resolve settling in my heart, I embraced the uncertainty of the future, understanding that every moment was a blank page waiting to be filled with the story of my resurgence. I looked forward with cautious optimism as the bus continued its steady route along the highway. Each bump and turn, every pause and distant rumble of the engine reminded me that I was leaving behind a world of betrayal and stepping into a realm of potential. I was determined to make every mile count, to honor the past by building a future that was undeniably my own. Every second of that long ride whispered promises of renewal, of a life not shackled by the weight of lost trust, but elevated by the strength found in starting anew. Today, in that crowded bus station and on that endless road, I embraced my new beginning with all the hope, fear, and determination that I could muster. I was in the middle of an important business meeting when a sudden, incessant buzzing shattered the sterile silence of the boardroom. My phone, which had been stowed away in my suit pocket, erupted with notifications, one after another. I glanced at the screen, and my heart sank. There were 39 missed calls. The numbers were unfamiliar, most of them shrouded in mystery, yet 3 of them were from Helen. I knew that voice all too well, panicked, urgent, and laced with emotion. I excused myself from the meeting, leaving behind the cluttered table and the half-finished sentences of my colleagues, and stepped into the cool corridor. With shaking fingers, I pressed play on the first voicemail. Helen's voice, trembling with anxiety, filled my ears as she said, "Call me. It's Celeste. She found you." That single message struck me like a thunderbolt. 2 decades of careful planning, of building a life away from that toxic past, seemed to vanish in an instant. I felt as though my carefully constructed world was collapsing around me. I continued to listen, my pulse racing, as another message from Celeste followed. Her tone was demanding and fragile at the same time. "You can't ignore me forever. We need to talk." And then came a third message, a flood of sobbing and desperate pleas. "I know I hurt you, but you're my husband. I made one mistake. You owe me at least a conversation." The raw emotion in her voice made my stomach churn with revulsion and disbelief. I had spent so many years trying to escape the poisonous cycle she had created. Now, faced with these messages, I felt the old wounds reopening. I stood there, feeling trapped between memories of betrayal and a past I thought was buried for good. Every ring, every vibration on my phone, was a reminder that the life I had fought so hard to build was now under threat. I replayed each voicemail in my mind, trying to grasp the full weight of what was happening. Celeste's voice, once a source of warmth and comfort, now seemed to carry only malice and regret. It was as if she were reaching out from a dark abyss, demanding that I acknowledge her presence, that I somehow return to the life we once shared, even though I had long since abandoned that destructive chapter. In that moment of disillusionment, I realized that the past was not ready to let me go. The very phone that had become my lifeline to a new beginning now pulsed with the ghost of a relationship I had hoped was over. Anger and sorrow warred within me as I stared at the screen, unable to decide whether to call back or simply walk away. I thought of the countless nights I had spent planning a future free from Celeste's manipulations, of the long road I had traveled to reclaim my identity and self-worth. And now, in a cruel twist of fate, everything I had built was in jeopardy. I recalled the countless lessons I had learned about trust and betrayal, and the bitter realization that some scars never truly fade. As I stood there in the quiet corridor, the noise of the boardroom fading into a distant hum, I felt the gravity of my situation settle over me like a heavy shroud. The messages were not just calls for attention. They were a summons from a past that refused to be ignored, a past that demanded to be confronted, regardless of how painful it might be. Determined not to let this intrusion derail the progress I had made, I composed a brief text to Helen. Meeting tomorrow. Denny's on 5th, 7 a.m. Come alone. In that short message, I found a semblance of control, a single decision in a moment when everything else seemed out of my grasp. I knew that facing Celeste again was inevitable, that the unresolved anger and betrayal would have to be confronted sooner or later. With the text sent, I took a deep breath, trying to steady the rapid beating of my heart, and resolved to face whatever came next with the same determination that had carried me through the darkest moments of my past. In that quiet corridor, amid the echoes of 39 missed calls and the ghosts of a painful history, I embraced the painful truth. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but I was ready to face it head-on, even if it meant revisiting wounds I had long thought healed. I sat in the quiet booth of a small roadside diner, waiting for Helen to arrive. The air in the diner was heavy with the aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries, a stark contrast to the bitter taste of betrayal that still lingered in my heart. I remember the moment Helen stepped in, looking older yet still carrying the same nervous energy I had known since our younger days. Her eyes darted around the room as if she carried a secret too heavy to hold. Without wasting another second, she slid into the booth across from me and blurted out, "He's in deep trouble. Bad trouble." Her voice trembled with urgency, and I could see the worry etched on her face. I leaned forward, setting my untouched cup of coffee on the table, and said in a quiet, steady tone, "Tell me everything." Helen took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before she began to unravel the shocking news. Apparently, Celeste had not only left, but had also racked up massive debts that threatened to ruin her completely. Her credit cards were maxed out. Her house teetered on the edge of foreclosure, and worst of all, she had been searching for me for months. It was not that she missed our past or felt any true remorse for what she had done. She was driven by a desperate need for money, a need that she hoped I would somehow fulfill. Listening to her words, I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Memories of our early days together surfaced, days filled with hope, dreams, and promises of forever. But those memories had long since turned bitter, overshadowed by Celeste's calculated cruelty. I wondered how someone I once loved so dearly could descend into such depths of greed and despair. The realization struck me hard. The woman who had shared my life had become a stranger, one whose actions were now guided solely by self-interest and financial desperation. Helen continued, her voice soft yet firm, explaining how Celeste had lost control of her life. Every phone call and letter that I had once dismissed as insignificant now painted a picture of a woman drowning in her own mistakes. I remembered the times I had ignored the small red flags, the subtle hints that something was not right. Now, it all came rushing back in a torrent of regret and sorrow. I felt trapped between a past that was impossible to forget and a future that was quickly becoming uncertain. In that small booth, with the soft murmur of other patrons in the background, I realized that this confrontation was inevitable. I had to face the consequences of a life built on broken trust and shattered dreams. I sipped my coffee slowly, each sip grounding me in the reality that I could no longer run from the past. The diner, with its worn-out decor and the comforting clink of cutlery, became a silent witness to my inner turmoil. I had no desire to see Celeste again, yet the ties of our shared history were too strong to sever completely. As Helen finished her account, I could feel the weight of her words pressing down on me. I knew that the showdown with Celeste was not a matter of if, but when. In that moment, sitting alone in that modest booth, I made a decision. I would no longer let her control my life from the shadows. I would confront this mess head-on, no matter how painful it might be. The thought of facing Celeste filled me with a mix of dread and determination, a determination to reclaim the parts of me that had been lost in the chaos of our past. I glanced around the diner, at the ordinary faces and everyday conversations, and realized that life continued despite the upheaval. It was a small comfort, knowing that the world moved on even as my own life was in turmoil. Today, in that unassuming booth at a roadside diner, I vowed to stand up for myself and to finally draw a line under the years of deceit. The showdown was coming, and I would meet it not as a broken man, but as someone who had learned the hard lessons of betrayal and was ready to build a future free from the chains of the past. The hours in that diner seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute filled with silent reflections and a growing resolve. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, the dreams that had been shattered, and the future that was now uncertain. Every word Helen spoke echoed in my mind, mingling with the quiet hum of the diner's old jukebox playing in the corner. The soft tunes brought back memories of simpler times, times when hope was not yet a distant memory and trust had not been so brutally broken. Now, with every beat of my heart, I felt a determination rising inside me. I was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant reopening old wounds and stepping into a painful confrontation with the past. I sat back, my eyes fixed on the window as I watched the rain begin to fall softly outside. Each raindrop mirrored the tears I had shed in silence, the grief of a love lost and a life undone. Yet, in that quiet moment, I also saw the promise of renewal, a chance to rebuild my life brick by brick, free from the shadows of deception. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with difficulty, but I was prepared to walk it with a steady heart and a clear mind. The diner, the rain, and the quiet resolve inside me all marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would finally reclaim control and let go of the past that had once held me captive. The next morning, I sat at my office desk, reviewing some documents, when the unexpected happened. The glass doors of the conference room parted and there she was, Celeste, my former wife, accompanied by a man I barely recognized, his presence marking him as her new husband, Mark. I felt a chill, as if the room's temperature had dropped instantly. I had heard whispers about Celeste remarrying, but nothing prepared me for the shock of seeing her standing there, feigning tears and wearing a forced smile that did little to hide the desperation in her eyes. Her gaze locked onto mine through the clear glass, and in that moment, every lie and every betrayal of the past came flooding back. I remembered the lonely gas station abandonment, the cruel text messages, and the cold realization that my life had been shattered. Now, here she was, back in my life, expecting me to take on her burdens without a second thought. "Oh my God, look at you," she gasped in a tone that mixed surprise with something I couldn't quite place as remorse. "I knew you'd be successful." But her voice, which once carried promises of love and security, now sounded hollow and rehearsed. I remained seated, my face set in a mask of calm that barely concealed the storm raging inside. "Sit down," I said, my voice even but laced with a hint of cold finality. Mark shifted awkwardly beside her, his discomfort obvious as he avoided my gaze. The air in the room grew thick with tension, and I could feel every eye on us as we prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Celeste began, her words stumbling out in a desperate attempt to reclaim what she had lost. "I made one little mistake," she started, but I cut her off sharply. "You left me at a gas station," I stated firmly, the words hanging between us like an accusation that could not be ignored. Her face flushed with anger and embarrassment as she tried to continue. "We came back," she whined, her voice trembling with a mix of indignation and fear. "Too late," I replied, and the finality in my tone left no room for further argument. The facade crumbled quickly after that. With a sudden change in her expression, Celeste dropped the pretense entirely and spoke with an unsettling bluntness. Fine. We need $175,000. You're rich. Just help us out, she demanded, her eyes darting between mine and Mark's, as if expecting me to magically conjure a solution to the ruin she had created. I leaned back slowly, reaching into the drawer of my desk to pull out a thick folder that contained all the evidence of my success, my achievements, and the hard-won life I'd built since she had abandoned me. I looked at her with a mix of pity and resolve as I said, "Funny you should mention your house. I bought your mortgage." The words, simple yet devastating, were delivered in a tone that carried the weight of years of betrayal and self-reliance. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mark's face turned ashen and Celeste's eyes widened in shock, the full meaning of my words sinking in. For a long, heavy moment, we all sat in the stillness, the only sounds the distant hum of the city outside and the rapid beating of my heart. I remembered every detail of the betrayal, every scar left by Celeste's choices. I had spent years trying to build something authentic out of the ruins of our past, a life where I would never again allow someone to treat me as disposable. Her sudden return, with Mark as a silent accomplice in her desperate scheme, felt like a final attempt to drag me back into the vortex of her chaos. My mind raced as I thought about every promise she had broken, every hope she had shattered. I had learned that trust is a fragile thing, easily broken by lies and selfish desires. Now, faced with the tangible consequences of her actions, I realized that some wounds run too deep to ever truly heal. The documents in the folder were not just pieces of paper, but symbols of my hard work, resilience, and the stark contrast between the life I had rebuilt and the toxic past I had left behind. I could see the fear in Mark's eyes as he glanced between Celeste and me, a silent acknowledgement that he was caught in a situation beyond his control. Celeste's pleas turned to silent sobs as she realized that her desperate demands were met with an unyielding wall of truth. I felt a sense of liberation in that moment, as if every painful memory was being purged with the finality of my words. The confrontation was not merely an exchange of accusations. It was a declaration of independence, a severing of ties with a life that had long been mired in deceit. As the tension slowly ebbed, I knew that this was the turning point, the moment when I truly let go of the past. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking a steady affirmation of time moving forward, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding beneath its gaze. Every second that passed was a step away from the pain and toward a future that I had carefully crafted, a future where my worth was defined by my own hands, not by the demands of a woman who had long ago abandoned loyalty for convenience. In that silent aftermath, as I gathered my papers and steeled myself for the journey ahead, I made a solemn promise to myself. I would never allow the past to dictate my future, and I would ensure that the lessons learned from this confrontation would serve as the foundation of a new chapter in my life, a chapter marked by clarity, strength, and an unwavering commitment to self-respect. I left the room that day with a sense of finality, knowing that while the scars of betrayal might never fully fade, they would serve as constant reminders of the resilience and determination that had brought me to this moment of liberation. I never imagined that the fallout from that fateful confrontation would leave such a deep scar on my soul. In the weeks after Celeste and Mark had confronted me, I found myself caught between memories of a painful past and the uncertain hope of a future I was forced to rebuild alone. Every day felt like walking through a dense fog where every step stirred up old memories of betrayal and heartbreak. I would wake up in the quiet of my empty home, the silence around me echoing the loss of the life I once thought we had shared. The images of that lonely gas station, the cold text messages, and the bitter exchange in my office replayed in my mind relentlessly. The shock of seeing Celeste, desperate and demanding, still haunted me. I could not shake the feeling that everything had collapsed into a void where trust and love no longer existed. In the solitude of long, restless nights, I examined every detail of our shattered past. I recalled the false promises and the careless lies that had paved the way for this downfall. The remnants of our once bright life now lay scattered like broken glass, each shard cutting into my heart as I tried to piece together a semblance of who I once was. I found myself questioning every decision, every moment when I had turned a blind eye to her subtle hints of deceit. The fallout was more than just the loss of my belongings or the collapse of our shared dreams. It was the painful revelation that I had allowed myself to be blinded by love and hope. Yet, in that darkness, I began to see a faint light. I slowly learned that grief, as all-consuming as it felt, could also be a catalyst for change. Determined to reclaim what little I had left, I sought refuge in the simplicity of everyday life. I returned to the routine of small tasks, organizing my scattered papers, tending to my modest garden, and taking long walks in the nearby park where nature offered a silent, healing presence. Each day, as I sat on a weathered bench beneath an ancient oak, I allowed the cool breeze and the rustling leaves to remind me that life, despite its harsh twists, still moved forward. I reached out to old friends and even considered professional help, not because I was weak, but because I recognized that rebuilding a life from the ruins required strength and support. The fallout had stripped away the pretenses and left me raw and exposed, yet it also gifted me the opportunity to confront my own vulnerabilities. I began to understand that true recovery was not about forgetting the past, but rather learning from it, accepting that the pain was a part of my story while refusing to let it define my future. In quiet moments of introspection, I found that forgiveness was not for Celeste or Mark, but for myself, a chance to free my heart from the weight of resentment and sorrow. As the days turned into weeks, I discovered small victories that rekindled my sense of self. A smile from a stranger on the street, a kind word from a neighbor, and the simple act of watching the sunrise reminded me that life was still worth living. Every morning, as I watched the first light break through the darkness, I made a silent vow to move forward, no matter how slowly. I recognized that the fallout was a turning point, a painful ending that also held the seed of a new beginning. I began to rebuild my life piece by piece, carving out moments of joy amid the lingering ache of loss. Slowly, I learned to let go of the past and embrace the uncertain beauty of a future that I was now determined to shape with my own hands. I understood that the scars I bore were not just marks of betrayal, but also symbols of resilience and hard-won wisdom. With each passing day, the raw pain softened into a quiet determination. I realized that while the fallout had changed me forever, it had also prepared me to build something stronger, something that would honor my journey through despair and lead me to a place of healing. I stepped forward into the unknown with a heart that had learned to hope again, even as it carried the deep echoes of yesterday. I remember the day clearly, as if every moment was etched into my mind with searing intensity. It wasn't enough to simply take their house. I had to destroy the very symbol of all the lies and pain. I arranged for a demolition crew to come at first light, a decision that felt both inevitable and necessary. I had spent years building a new life from the ruins of our past, a life I had painstakingly assembled piece by piece. Standing outside the house that had once been Celeste's refuge from reality, I cradled a cup of coffee in my hand, its warmth a small comfort amid the chill of impending retribution. The house, a crumbling monument to the betrayal and neglect that had defined our past, seemed almost to tremble under the weight of its own history. In that moment, I realized that this was not merely about revenge. It was about delivering justice for the years I had suffered in silence, for every shattered hope and every lost dream. I watched as the demolition crew set to work, their heavy machinery rumbling like the beating of a furious heart. The sound of metal crashing against concrete filled the air, a relentless percussion that drowned out the echoes of my own thoughts. Each strike, each burst of dust and debris, felt like a cleansing force, a final severance of the toxic ties that had bound me to a painful past. Helen stood nearby, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and quiet approval, as if witnessing the collapse of that house meant witnessing the fall of an old, destructive order. I could see in her gaze that she too recognized the symbolic significance of this act. For me, it was not an outburst of uncontrolled rage, but rather a measured, deliberate step toward reclaiming my future. Every broken brick, every splinter of wood, represented the shattering of a life I had once known, a life where I had been manipulated, used, and ultimately abandoned. The demolition wasn't performed in haste. I had meticulously planned every detail, ensuring that each moment of destruction would mark the end of an era defined by deceit and betrayal. As I stood there, the steady hiss of hydraulic presses and the thunder of collapsing walls combined to form a symphony of finality. I felt an odd mixture of relief and melancholy, a recognition that the destruction of the house was also the destruction of a chapter of my life I had been forced to close. I sipped my coffee slowly, the bitter liquid matching the taste of the past I was determined to leave behind. The crew worked methodically, their actions precise and unyielding, mirroring the resolve that had grown within me over the years. In that space between the sound of demolition and the silence that followed each collapse, I heard the echoes of every whispered promise and every lie that had been uttered under that roof. Now, as the structure began to crumble into irretrievable rubble, I felt a strange liberation. The house, a physical representation of the false love and broken trust one had once known, was finally being reduced to dust. I could see Celeste's face in every shattered fragment, a painful reminder of a woman who had promised everything and delivered nothing but heartache. And as I stood there, I realized that it wasn't merely the house that was burning down. It was the last vestige of a past that had kept me captive for far too long. Mark's angry departure had already signaled the end of an era, but this final act of demolition was my declaration that I would no longer be tethered to memories of betrayal. In that raw, unfiltered moment, I found the strength to embrace a future free from the toxic remnants of what once was. The ground trembled beneath the falling debris, and with each collapse, I felt the weight of regret and sorrow lifting off my shoulders. I knew that the journey ahead would be long and fraught with its own challenges, but the ruin of that house gave me the courage to believe that I could rebuild my life on my own terms. As the dust settled and the echoes of destruction faded into an eerie silence, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. The act of burning it all down was not driven by a desire for petty revenge, but by a deep, abiding need for justice. A justice that would allow me to move forward unburdened by the ghosts of the past. In that silence, punctuated only by the fading roar of machinery and the whisper of the wind, I vowed to never again allow myself to be defined by the cruelty of another. I would rebuild, not for anyone else, but for me, a man who had learned that sometimes, to truly start over, one must first let everything else burn away. I had reached a turning point where I could no longer be defined by the bitter memories of betrayal. Standing on the barren plot of land where Celeste's ruined house had once stood, I felt both sorrow and a burning resolve. This empty space was not merely soil and dust. It was the blank page on which I would write a new story. I decided to build affordable housing here, a safe haven for those who had been crushed by life's hardships, especially for single parents escaping toxic relationships. I envisioned a place where people, battered by their pasts, could rebuild their lives with dignity and hope. I named this project Lillian Place in honor of Helen, the one family member who had stood by me through every dark moment, offering kindness when I had none left to give. Every brick laid and every nail hammered at Lillian Place carried a part of my own journey from despair to renewal. I never intended to create a mansion or luxurious apartments. My goal was simple yet profound. A modest community where support replaced judgment and every resident could begin to heal. I spent long hours at the construction site, overseeing every detail, ensuring that the structure would serve as a beacon of new beginnings rather than a monument to old wounds. Neighbors, local volunteers, and even strangers touched by my story came together, drawn by the promise of transformation. With every shovelful of earth moved and every wall raised, I felt the heavy burden of the past lighten, replaced by a quiet pride that only comes from rebuilding a life on one's own terms. Then, on a cool autumn morning, as I was reviewing blueprints in my modest office on site, my phone rang, a call from Celeste. Her voice trembled on the line, filled with desperation and regret. It was surreal. The woman who had shattered my world now sought my help. I agreed to meet her in my office, determined that this encounter would serve as the final closure to our painful history. When Celeste arrived, her eyes were wild with a mix of defiance and sorrow. I handed her a rental application for one of the units in Lillian Place. "You're welcome to apply," I said simply, my tone leaving no doubt that this offer was not charity but the natural consequence of the choices she had made. Celeste's face contorted with anger as she sputtered, "After everything I did for you?" I only offered a quiet smile, for the irony was clear. The help she now sought was exactly what she had earned through her actions. That moment, charged with the residue of our past, confirmed that my future, and that of Lillian Place, would be built on justice tempered with compassion. In the months that followed, Lillian Place grew into a vibrant community. I walked its corridors and quiet courtyards, listening to the stories of those who had found refuge within its walls. I heard tales of hardship and survival, of hope rekindled in the face of overwhelming odds. Each new resident brought their own scars, and yet together they formed a tapestry of resilience that inspired me daily. Their laughter, quiet conversations, and the determined look in their eyes reminded me that from the deepest pain, beauty could still arise. Every time I saw a child running freely or an elder sharing wisdom with a neighbor, I knew that the journey from despair to hope was possible, not just for me, but for all who had ever been cast aside. I discovered that the true reward of building Lillian Place was not measured in dollars or square footage, but in the strength and courage of those who chose to start over. Here, in this little community, the ghosts of my past were slowly replaced by the promise of a new future. Each day, I felt the power of healing and the transformative force of kindness. I had built more than just affordable housing. I had built a symbol of rebirth, a sanctuary where broken lives could mend and dreams could take root. I learned that even when the pain of betrayal cuts deep, it can eventually give way to growth and a renewed sense of purpose. Every brick of Lillian Place told a story of loss, of love betrayed, and ultimately, of the strength it takes to rebuild from nothing. I had turned the remnants of my shattered past into a foundation for the future, and in doing so, I had discovered that hope, once kindled, can light even the darkest paths. I stared at the horizon as the first light of dawn broke through the darkness of my past, each ray a reminder that nothing truly ends, it only transforms. I had rebuilt my life from the ruins of betrayal and heartache, brick by brick and tear by tear, and now I stood at the edge of a future that was as uncertain as it was promising. The lessons I learned through every moment of suffering, every act of defiance, and every small victory had forged in me an unyielding strength. I realized that the final lesson was not about retribution or punishment, but about the acceptance of change and the willingness to let go of the chains that once bound me to a life I no longer recognized. In the quiet solitude of my study, with the soft hum of the morning wind outside, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The past was a collection of vivid memories, painful yet instructive, and I understood that to truly move forward, I had to embrace every shard of my former self, even those that were broken beyond repair. I recalled the cold, lonely hours at the desolate gas station, the bitter taste of betrayal when Celeste vanished without warning, leaving behind not only my possessions, but also the remnants of a shared dream. I remembered the storm of missed calls that shattered the fragile peace I had built over the years, each ring a ghost of a past that I desperately tried to leave behind. And then there was the final confrontation, when I looked into the eyes of a woman I once loved, and in that moment, I recognized the futility of holding on to what had been lost. I realized that forgiveness was not about condoning the pain inflicted upon me, but about freeing myself from the relentless grip of anger and regret. It was a lesson carved deep into my soul, a lesson that taught me that the path to true liberation lay in accepting the impermanence of life. Every decision I had made, every step I took away from the darkness, was a silent promise to myself that I would never allow the past to dictate my future. The demolition of Celeste's house, the creation of Lillian Place, and the painful conversations that followed were all chapters in a story that was finally coming full circle. I understood that the scars I bore were not symbols of weakness, but of survival. They reminded me that even in the midst of devastation, there could be rebirth, and that every ending paved the way for a new beginning. As I sat there, a gentle smile played on my lips, a quiet acknowledgement of all I had endured and all I had overcome. The world outside was vast and ever-changing, and in its constant motion, I found solace. I resolved that from this day forward, I would live with intention and compassion, never forgetting the trials that had shaped me, yet refusing to be defined by them. I had learned that true strength came from within, and that every challenge, no matter how insurmountable it seemed, was an opportunity to grow. In the soft glow of the rising sun, I made a vow to honor my past without letting it shackle my spirit. I would embrace each new day with hope and determination, carrying with me the wisdom of my experiences and the promise of a future unburdened by regret. This was my final lesson, a quiet, enduring truth that no matter how harsh the journey, the human spirit has the power to rise, rebuild, and ultimately find peace.